The polished car key gleamed under the kitchen light as I placed it in her palm. I expected warmth, maybe even tears of gratitude, but instead, her smile was thin, rehearsed, like a stranger practicing a role. Hours later, the key was gone from its usual spot, leaving a hollow echo in the bowl where it belonged. My chest tightened as unease clawed at me. Somehow, I knew this wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon, and it had already been turned against me. Backhand index pointing right. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. The morning light filtered through the blinds in broken strips, laying pale lines across the kitchen table. I set the coffee pot down gently, listening to the soft gurgle as it poured into my mug. For a brief moment, it felt like an ordinary morning, sunlight warming the tiles, the faint hum of the fridge, the smell of fresh toast. But then I heard it. A sharp metallic clink. She tossed the car key onto the table like loose change, it sounded louder than anything else in the room. I looked up. She didn't. My wife sat slouched in her chair, scrolling her phone with one hand, coffee cup balanced in the other. The key, the very gift I had given her only a day before, sat there between us, cold and lifeless, as if it had never meant anything. Rough night? I asked, keeping my tone even, though the question hung heavier than I intended. She didn't look up. It's just a car, not a crown. Don't look so proud of yourself. The words landed like a slap I didn't see coming. I tightened my grip on my mug, staring at the key glinting in the sunlight. Just a car. 30 years of labor in rain and sweat, sacrifices stacked one over the other, and when I thought I was giving her something meaningful, she reduced it to just a car. My daughter walked in just then, hair pulled back loosely, still half asleep. She froze at the tension hanging in the air. "Morning," she whispered, sensing the unease. She glanced at me, then at her mother, then back at me again. Her mother laughed, scrolling past another picture on her phone. "Your father thinks he's a hero because of some wheels." I forced a small smile for my daughter's sake. It's not about being a hero. It's about giving your mother something she deserves. My daughter stepped closer, her eyes flicking to the key on the table. She bit her lip, hesitating, then said softly, "Mom's just tired, Dad." Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Her voice was careful, almost apologetic. She wasn't defending me, but she wasn't turning against me either. Neutral ground, that's all she could manage. I nodded, letting the comment pass, though the weight of my wife's dismissal pressed harder than ever. The rest of the morning unfolded in fragments of silence. The scraping of a chair, the clicking of her phone, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog outside. But through it all, my eyes kept drifting back to that key. It didn't sit there like a symbol of love, it sat like evidence. I remembered how I had chosen it, standing in the showroom, the salesman handing me the sleek fob with a smile, the thought running through my head that maybe, just maybe, this would remind her of the woman I had married. But here, in this moment, it was nothing more than a metal shard between us. She finished her coffee abruptly, pushing the chair back with a screech. "Don't expect me to parade this thing around like it's some jewel. A car is a car. Don't make it more than it is." I kept my voice low, steady, though every word tasted like iron. "It's my house, not your garage." She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing, as if weighing whether to bite back. But instead, she smirked, shaking her head, and walked out without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the kitchen. My daughter stayed behind, staring at the empty chair her mother left. She looked at me, uncertain, as though torn between loyalty and doubt. "She'll calm down," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. I nodded again, more for her comfort than mine. "Eat your breakfast," I murmured, taking another sip of coffee that now tasted bitter. The rest of the day blurred into routine, mowing the lawn, folding laundry, tidying the garage. Small acts to keep my hands busy while my mind replayed that clattering sound of the key on the table. I noticed things I hadn't before, how her laughter on the phone had a sharper edge, how her silences stretched longer, how her footsteps seemed to avoid the rooms I was in. By evening, the house grew unnervingly quiet. My daughter was in her room, music low behind her door. My wife hadn't said where she was going, and I didn't ask. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee mug again, staring at the empty bowl where we usually kept the keys. My fingers brushed its smooth surface. Empty. The car key wasn't there. I stood, checking the counter, the side table by the door, even the small hook near the garage. Nothing. The key was gone, and with it, the small thread of reassurance I had been clinging to all day. I walked to the window, peering through the blinds. The driveway sat in shadows, empty. My old truck was still there, but the new car, the one I had given her, was missing. A hollow ache spread through me, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know where she had gone, or with whom. All I knew was that the gift meant to bind us had already begun to unravel everything instead. And as I stood there in the darkening kitchen, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the house settling, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore: this house didn't feel like mine tonight. Not with that car gone. Not with that key missing. The following evening, my daughter suggested we have dinner together at the local diner. I agreed, thinking maybe a neutral place would calm the storm that had been building in our home. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the glass doors as we walked in, the low murmur of voices blending with the clink of silverware. She was already there, my wife, seated at a corner booth, the car key dangling from her finger as if it were jewelry. The way she twirled it, casual and careless, made something burn low in my chest. I slid into the booth opposite her, my daughter hesitating before sitting beside her mother. Already, the sides of this war were beginning to show. "Glad you could make it," my wife said flatly, eyes not meeting mine. She placed the key on the table between us, deliberately, like a gauntlet thrown. "We need to settle this. The car should be in my name." The words weren't loud, but they carried. Two men at the counter paused mid-bite, exchanging glances. A woman at the next booth leaned just enough to listen. I felt the heat of eyes on us. I steadied my voice. "It's registered. It's insured. It's ours." She gave a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "No. It's yours on paper. And you know what paper means in this town. Control. I won't live under your thumb every time I turn the ignition." Her nails tapped against the key, metallic against wood, each click louder than the chatter around us. My daughter shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, maybe this isn't the place." But her mother cut her off. "This is exactly the place. Let everyone see what kind of man you really are." I leaned back, studying her. The diner's light caught in the reflection of the key, the shine slicing into my eyes. I thought of the years I had carried her through sickness, through bills, through every hard winter. And now, in front of strangers, she turned it all into spectacle. "Why now?" I asked quietly. She leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "Because I'm tired of asking. Either you transfer it, or I'll find a way to do it myself." The word "either" cut through me. It wasn't just a request anymore, it was the seed of an ultimatum. A fork clattered from a nearby table. Someone coughed. The diner had grown quieter, as if the walls themselves leaned closer. I kept my tone level. "You're asking me to sign away my respect." My wife smirked. "Respect doesn't come from a line on a registration form." She nudged the key across the table toward me, the scrape of metal loud. "It comes from not humiliating your family in public." But she wasn't talking about humiliation, she was performing it. I reached for the mug of coffee the waitress had set down minutes before. The steam curled into the tense air. I let the silence stretch, knowing every eye in the diner was on us. My daughter's hand twitched, as though she wanted to reach for mine but couldn't bring herself to. Dad, she whispered finally, her voice breaking just slightly. Maybe it's easier if you just let her have it. The betrayal wasn't in her words, it was in her hesitation. For the first time, she didn't look at me for guidance. She looked at her mother, then at the people around us, as if their judgment weighed more than mine. I stared at the key lying between us. Not long ago, it had been a promise, a gift. Now it sat like a wedge, driving us apart with each passing second. You think this is about a car? I asked softly, almost to myself. She smiled thinly. It's always about control. The waitress hovered nearby, her eyes darting nervously, unsure whether to step in or stay back. At the counter, one of the men muttered something to his companion, both shaking their heads. The weight of public shame pressed down hard, suffocating. I stood abruptly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floor. If you wanted the world to see this, then let them see. Let them see how a gift became a demand. How a family became a transaction. Gasps rippled softly through the diner. I reached for my wallet, pulling out a few bills for the untouched food. As I laid the money down, I looked at my daughter, her eyes wide and uncertain. You don't have to choose tonight, I said quietly. But one day, you will. I turned to leave, but not before glancing once more at the table. The car key still sat there, unmoved, shining like a knife under the harsh diner lights. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the door jingled shut behind me. But even as I walked away, the sound of whispers followed, carried on the wind. Inside that diner, something had shifted. It wasn't just our family that had seen the fracture, it was the whole town. And fractures spread. The next morning began with a paper cut. At least, that's how it felt. I slit open the envelope from the bank with a dull letter opener, and the sight inside stung more than any blade. Withdrawals. Several. All linked to an account I hadn't touched in weeks. My hand tightened around the paper, crinkling it. She was siphoning money quietly, drip by drip, as if I'd never notice. I sat at the kitchen table, the bank statement spread before me like evidence in a trial. Sunlight streamed in, but the numbers cast shadows longer than any morning light. The car key was gone from the bowl again. For 2 days now, it never seemed to rest where it belonged. Sometimes on the counter, sometimes in her purse, sometimes just, missing. And each absence spoke louder than her words ever could. I heard footsteps. She swept into the kitchen, humming as if nothing were wrong, handbag slung across her arm. Morning, I said flatly. Don't start, she muttered, brushing past me to the cabinet. I held up the bank statement. Then explain this. Her eyes flicked to the paper, then away, like it was beneath her. I needed things. Groceries. Gas. Groceries? My voice dropped, low, steady. Groceries don't cost $500 in a day. She shrugged, her lips curling into that smirk I'd grown to dread. Maybe I treated myself. You spend on your hobbies, don't you? I slammed my palm against the table, the paper rustling violently. My hobbies don't bleed this family dry. Before she could answer, my daughter wandered in, still tying her hair. She froze at the tension, her eyes flicking between us. What's going on? Your father thinks buying a car wasn't enough, my wife snapped. Now he wants to interrogate me for living my life. I stared at her, the bank statement trembling slightly in my hand. Living your life? You're gambling it away. The word hung heavy, though I hadn't seen proof yet. It wasn't groceries. It wasn't gas. It was something else. Something darker. My daughter stepped in gently, her voice soft. Mom, maybe just, tell him what you bought. Clear it up. But her mother only scoffed. Don't take his side. He's making this bigger than it is. I exhaled, forcing calm. Show me the receipts. Just receipts. That's all I ask. Her jaw tightened. She grabbed her bag, muttered something under her breath, and headed for the door. But as she reached for the knob, I caught sight of it, the car key, dangling from a ring that wasn't ours. It wasn't the familiar set I kept in the bowl. No, this ring was heavier, fancier, with a strange fob attached. And attached to that ring, was his key. Her boyfriend's. For a second, my world tilted. She noticed my stare, her grip tightening on the keys. What? That's not your ring, I said quietly. She froze, then recovered with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. Keys are keys. Don't read into it. But the damage was done. The image was seared into me, the car key I had given her, twined with another man's. Not hidden. Displayed. My daughter frowned, looking from me to her mother. Whose is that? She asked cautiously. None of your business, her mother snapped, yanking the door open. If you can't trust me, then maybe you don't deserve to. The door slammed, rattling the frame. I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, the silence thick and heavy. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, her eyes wide. Dad, maybe it's nothing, she whispered, though even she didn't sound convinced. I didn't answer. I just laid the bank statement flat again, smoothing the wrinkles with my palm. Numbers don't lie. And neither do keys. The rest of the day blurred. I tried mowing the lawn, but every pass of the blade felt mechanical, my thoughts circling that ring of keys. By afternoon, I found myself at the bank, standing stiff before the clerk. She looked down at the account details, then back at me with professional calm. Sir, several withdrawals were authorized recently. All from joint access. Nothing illegal, just unusual. Unusual how? I pressed. She hesitated, lowering her voice. Gas stations across town. Hotels. Online orders under another name. Another name. The words sank like a stone in my stomach. I left the bank with the world spinning, my shoes heavy on the pavement. Outside, I caught sight of the car parked at the curb. My car. My gift. And there it was again, the unfamiliar ring hanging from the ignition, mocking me through the windshield. By the time I walked home, the sun had dipped low, the house cast in orange shadows. My daughter sat quietly at the kitchen table, fiddling with her phone. She looked up at me, her face worried. Did you find out? She asked. I nodded slowly. Enough. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached for my arm, hesitant, as though afraid of the truth. I pulled the bank statement from my pocket and laid it flat before her. This isn't groceries, I said. This isn't gas. It's betrayal. In numbers. Her face fell, confusion warring with loyalty. She wanted to defend her mother, but the evidence sat there too clearly. That night, the house grew quiet again. I checked the bowl by the door out of habit. Empty. The key was gone, again. I stared at the hollow circle of ceramic, my reflection warped in its glaze. For the second time that week, I realized that what I had given in love had been stolen in deception. And the worst part? She wasn't even hiding it anymore. The house had grown colder in recent days, not in temperature but in spirit. Conversations were shorter, meals quieter, and the silences between us louder than any argument. That night, I sat at the dining table, bank statement still folded neatly in front of me. The kitchen light flickered above, buzzing faintly like a fly trapped against glass. Then the front door opened. She swept in, perfume sharp and unfamiliar, handbag heavy. My daughter followed a step behind, her expression tight. My wife dropped her purse onto the counter with a thud, then tossed the car key onto the table again. It skidded across the wood until it stopped just inches from me. We need to talk, she said flatly. I didn't move. So talk. Her eyes glittered in the dim light. I applied for credit. We're approved. My chest tightened. On our account? She smirked, almost proud. Joint. You'll see the papers soon. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. A heaviness settled in my chest. And when, exactly, were you planning to tell me? Her mother leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. When it was convenient. You drag your feet, always cautious, always clinging to the past. I won't let you hold me back anymore. I stared at her, then at my daughter, who still hadn't said a word. Something in her silence felt wrong. I reached for the key on the table, turning it slowly between my fingers. Its weight felt heavier tonight, as though it carried every secret I hadn't been told. Did you sign too? I asked, my voice low. My daughter froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. Answer me, I pressed. She finally looked up, guilt flashing across her face. He said it was just paperwork, nothing serious. Who? I demanded. Her eyes darted toward her mother before landing back on me. Harry. The name twisted in my gut. The boyfriend. The man whose key now hung beside mine. My daughter's voice trembled as she added, he said if I co-signed, it would help Mom. That it was just a formality. The chair scraped loudly as I stood. My wife didn't flinch, only smirked, as though she'd won some invisible game. You co-signed with him? I asked, the words aimed at my daughter but carrying the full weight of betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought it was for Mom. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I cut her off. You just signed your name beside a stranger's. The room crackled with tension. My wife tapped her nails against the counter, a steady rhythm that felt like mock applause. See, she said softly. Even your daughter knows who to trust. I turned, locking eyes with her. No. She doesn't trust you. She's trapped by you. Silence fell heavy. The only sound was the faint buzz of the kitchen light and the steady ticking of the wall clock. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my grip tightening around the key in my hand. My daughter stepped forward, voice trembling. Dad, please, don't make this worse. I looked at her, my heart aching. She wasn't my enemy, yet she had been used as one. You didn't just betray me, I said quietly, staring at the paper she still held in her bag. You co-signed your own downfall. Her shoulders sagged, the tears spilling freely now. My wife, however, only straightened, her chin raised defiantly. This house, this money, these cars, you don't get to control everything anymore, she snapped. Either you get on board, or you get out. The words landed heavy, an ultimatum sharper than any knife. I set the car key back on the table, deliberately, the metallic clink echoing in the silence. Then maybe, I whispered, it's time I stop paying for betrayal. Her smirk faltered. For the first time, her confidence cracked, just slightly. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the table. Instead, I turned away, walking toward the hallway. Behind me, the silence fractured into whispers, my daughter's sobs, my wife's hissing voice, the echo of betrayal settling into the walls of the house I had built. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkened window. The night pressed close, heavy with secrets. I thought of the decades spent working, saving, building, all to hand over a future that was now being drained by someone else's signature. But as anger pulsed hot in my veins, another thought rose, sharper, colder. I still held the power. My name. My accounts. My silence. They thought I would bend. They thought I would keep writing checks, keep covering debts, keep swallowing humiliation. But instead, I smiled. A slow, quiet smile in the dark. Because I had just made my decision. The next morning, the envelope waited for me on the kitchen table. Cream-colored, thick, stamped with a notary's seal. It wasn't hidden in a drawer, or slipped into a pile of mail. No, she had placed it dead center, where my eyes couldn't miss it. And beside it, like bait beside a trap, lay the car key. I didn't touch either. I simply stood there, staring at the two objects, one forged to bind me, the other once given in love, now poisoned by betrayal. She walked in minutes later, her heels clicking sharp against the tile. "Sign it," she said without pause, as though this were routine. I looked up at her, keeping my voice steady. "What is it?" "Transfer," she replied smoothly. "The car. Into my name." I picked up the envelope, turning it in my hand, feeling the weight of the seal. Inside, I imagined my name already scribbled in the wrong place, stripped of ownership. "And why does this need a notary?" Her lips curled. "Formality. Don't act like you don't know how these things work." Before I could answer, the door opened behind us. My daughter stepped in, followed by her boyfriend, Harry. The sight of him in my house made my stomach clench. He leaned against the doorway casually, smirk tugging at his lips, as though he already owned everything inside. "Morning," he drawled, eyeing the envelope. "We figured it'd be easier if you just signed today. No fuss." The arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. "Funny," I said quietly, "you speak as if my signature belongs to you." My wife stepped closer, shoving a pen toward me. "It's a car, not a war. Just sign." The key on the table gleamed, the light from the window catching its edge. For a moment, I imagined pressing that key into his smug hand, just to see how quickly his grin would fade when he realized dignity can't be transferred. I didn't move. Instead, I placed the envelope back on the table. "If you want me to sign, we'll do it properly." "At the bank." Her eyes narrowed. "Why the bank?" "Because if you're so sure this is nothing, you won't mind witnesses." She hesitated, but Harry grinned wider. "Fine. Let's go." The bank smelled faintly of ink and polished wood, the low murmur of clerks and customers filling the air. We approached the counter, the notary envelope clutched in my wife's hand, Harry at her side. I could feel eyes already drifting toward us, neighbors, townsfolk, people who knew me by name. The clerk, Mrs. Dorsey, adjusted her glasses as we approached. "Morning, William," she said warmly, before her gaze shifted to my wife and Harry. Her smile faltered. "How can I help you?" My wife slid the envelope across the counter. "We just need a quick signature. Transfer of ownership." Mrs. Dorsey opened it carefully, her brows furrowing as she scanned the document. Then she looked up at me. "Do you authorize this?" I shook my head once. "No." The room stilled. People nearby paused, pretending to browse papers while their ears leaned closer. Harry leaned on the counter, his voice oily. "It's already filled in. He just needs to put his name. Nothing complicated." Mrs. Dorsey frowned. "Sir, did you pre-approve this?" My wife interjected sharply, "He's just being stubborn. He agreed already." I felt the weight of every gaze in the lobby pressing against my back. I stepped closer to the counter, lowering my voice, but making sure it carried. "Mrs. Dorsey, I never signed anything. I never approved this. And I certainly never agreed to give away my property." Gasps rippled through the small cluster of onlookers. A man by the door muttered, "Shameful." Another whispered, "Trying to trick him." Harry's smirk faltered. My wife's face flushed deep red. Mrs. Dorsey straightened, her tone clipped and official. "Then I cannot process this document. Without mutual consent, it's void." She slid the envelope back across the counter, her expression firm. "And frankly, I'd advise you not to attempt this again." The whispers grew louder, sharper. Neighbors shaking their heads, murmuring words I couldn't catch but didn't need to. Judgment was written in their eyes. I picked up the envelope slowly, then set it flat on the counter. The car key clinked beside it. I had placed it there deliberately before we left, a silent reminder of what all this was about. I tapped it once with my finger, the sound echoing. "This key was a gift," I said, voice low but steady. "Not a contract. Not leverage. Not a weapon." The silence that followed was deafening. My wife's hand twitched as if to grab the envelope, but she stopped when Mrs. Dorsey's gaze sharpened. I turned, picking up the key, sliding it into my pocket. "We're done here." As I walked toward the door, the murmur of voices swelled behind me. Words like disgrace, desperate, shame trailed me out into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not yet. But the weight of silence had turned. No longer was I the one being humiliated. The world had seen the trap, and they had seen me step over it untouched. And that mattered. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I checked into a small roadside motel on the edge of town. The sign outside flickered, the neon buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. The room smelled faintly of dust and bleach, the kind of place where silence carried its own weight. I set my suitcase down by the bed and, with deliberate care, placed the car key on the desk. For a moment, I just stared at it. The same key that had once been a symbol of love was now evidence of betrayal. But tonight, it would become something else, my reminder that I wasn't powerless. I pulled open the drawer of the desk and found a small safe bolted to the inside. Slipping the key inside, I turned the dial until it clicked shut. That sound, it felt like sealing a chapter. For the first time, the key was locked away, no longer in her hands, no longer a weapon against me. Then I opened my laptop. The glow lit up the dim room, casting shadows against the faded wallpaper. I spread the bank statements across the desk like maps of a battlefield. Each line item, each withdrawal, was another bullet fired at me. But tonight, I would return fire. The first move was simple. I logged into our mortgage account. For decades, I had been the one keeping the roof over our heads, paying every bill without fail. My hands didn't shake as I clicked the option to cancel autopay. The confirmation pinged softly on the screen, but to me, it sounded like the crack of a gunshot. The second move, car insurance. I pulled up the account, saw her name listed as an authorized driver, and with a few swift clicks, removed it. The system confirmed the update, her name disappearing from the policy. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we had ever had. The third move was harder, more personal. I opened the grocery transfers, the quiet payments I made every month so she wouldn't have to worry about expenses. They had become routine, invisible. I stared at the numbers, at the years of sacrifice that had vanished without thanks. Then, with one final click, I shut it all down. The screen refreshed. The accounts were mine again. Clean. Untouched. I sat there for a long moment, my hands folded, the laptop humming faintly. The weight on my chest began to ease, replaced by something colder, sharper, clarity. I thought about the years of sweat, late nights, double shifts, saving for their future. And in one careless motion, they had treated it like scraps, feeding another man's pockets. But now, the game had changed. For the first time in years, my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the nightstand. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking like chains breaking. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked older, yes, but it also looked harder. On the desk, the safe sat closed, the car key locked inside. That image burned into me, the key was no longer her weapon. It was mine. I whispered aloud, to no one but the shadows, for the first time, my silence cost them more than my words ever did. The words felt like steel. I shut the laptop, turned off the light, and lay back on the stiff motel bed. The hum of the neon sign outside seeped through the window, a constant reminder of the world still spinning. But tonight, I finally slept. Not peacefully, no, peace was gone. But with purpose. Because by morning, the consequences would begin. And they had no idea the storm I had just unleashed. By Wednesday morning, my phone had turned into a siren. 12 missed calls, all from the same 2 names. By Friday, there were 22. Each voicemail told a story, not of love, not of family, but of panic. The first was sharp, my wife's voice slicing through static. The mortgage bounced. What did you do? The second, angrier. Insurance says the car isn't covered anymore. Are you insane? By the fifth, Harry's voice replaced hers. His tone was pure venom. You think you're clever, old man? You'll regret this. I sat in the motel chair, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. I didn't answer, didn't call back. I just listened, then deleted, one by one. The room was quiet except for the hum of the mini-fridge and the occasional creak of the pipes. The safe in the corner held the car key, locked away, gleaming in my mind like a bullet waiting for its target. By Saturday, the messages had shifted. My wife's voice trembled now, laced with desperation. Please, just fix this. We can't live like this. My daughter's voice came next, softer, breaking. Dad, they're threatening to repossess things. Please. I don't know what to do. Her tone cracked something deep inside me. But I didn't move. Not yet. Because this wasn't about punishment, it was about balance. For years, I had carried them. Now, they were learning the weight of standing on their own. That evening, I walked down the street to the diner. The air smelled of fried food and strong coffee, the hum of voices filling the small space. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and let the chatter wash over me. At the counter, 2 men whispered. One leaned close to the other. Heard Harry's credit cards are frozen. Heard the wife can't even fuel the car. The other chuckled. About time. Their words weren't cruel, they were matter of fact. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the fool. I felt like the man who had finally closed his wallet and opened his eyes. When I returned to the motel, the phone was still buzzing. 27 missed calls. I set it face down on the desk and turned toward the safe. My hand brushed the cool metal, imagining the key inside. Not in her hand. Not in his pocket. Mine. By Sunday night, the tone of the voicemails shifted again. Harry's voice grew more frantic, less controlled. You think cutting us off will stop me? You don't know who you're dealing with. And then, softer, almost mocking. We'll come find you. That last message played in my head long after I deleted it. The motel clock ticked. The neon outside flickered. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me, tired but resolute. A knock shattered the silence. Sharp. Urgent. I froze, staring at the door. Another knock, harder this time. My heart beat steady, not fast, as I rose and stepped toward the peephole. Through the small glass circle, a face filled the frame, Harry's. His smirk stretched wide, but his eyes betrayed the edge of desperation. Behind him, in the dim hallway light, my wife's shadow shifted, restless. They had found me. And the storm I'd unleashed was now standing at my door. The knock didn't stop. It came again, steady and deliberate, the kind of rhythm that carried both arrogance and threat. I stood still, my eye pressed against the peephole, watching Harry smirk on the other side. My wife shifted behind him, her arms crossed, her face tight with fury. Open up, Harry called, his voice slick with mockery. You've had your fun. Now it's time to settle like adults. I didn't move. The only sound inside was the motel clock ticking, each second dragging like a blade. My wife's voice cut through the door. William, stop hiding. You've embarrassed us enough. Just sign the papers and fix this mess. I almost laughed. Embarrassed them? No. I'd simply stopped feeding their hunger. The embarrassment was their own, and the world was starting to see it. Another knock. Louder. My daughter's voice this time, muffled but desperate. Dad, please, just talk to us. That one hit harder than the rest. For a moment, my hand hovered near the doorknob. But then I remembered the safe in the corner, the car key locked inside like a loaded weapon. My decision had been made days ago. I slid the chain across the latch, cracked the door just enough for my voice to slip out. If you came to threaten me, you picked the wrong place. Harry leaned close, grin widening. Threaten? No. I'm just here to remind you, you're not the only one who can play with paperwork. Your name doesn't mean much when the bank listens to mine. His words didn't sting the way he hoped. I'd already seen the bank's files. Already knew the attempt he thought was hidden. I smirked. You mean the $50,000 loan? The one you tried to take against my house? The grin vanished. My wife's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I opened the door a little wider, my gaze locked on Harry. The banker called me personally. Said someone tried to put my home on the line. Your name was right there, next to hers. Gasps came from down the hall. The motel wasn't silent anymore, doors had cracked open, guests leaning out, phones already raised. The cheap carpet muffled their steps as they edged closer, eager spectators. Harry straightened, jaw tight. You can't prove that. I pulled the folded printout from my pocket, the record the banker had slipped me. I held it high enough for the hallway eyes to see. I don't have to prove it. The paper does. A murmur swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, tried to steal his house, another, shameful. My wife's face flushed, her confidence crumbling in real time. Harry, tell me he's lying. But Harry said nothing. His silence was answer enough. My daughter stepped forward, eyes wet. Mom, is it true? The weight of her voice crushed the hallway silence. All those phones angled closer, red recording lights blinking like tiny judgmental eyes. This wasn't private anymore. It was spectacle. I turned slowly, making sure every witness heard me clearly. You didn't just cheat on me. You tried to rob me. You tried to erase 30 years of work with one forged signature. The words rang like a gavel striking wood. Harry lunged forward, fist clenched, but the motel manager burst from the office, flanked by two men built like bouncers. That's enough, the manager barked, voice echoing down the hallway. Take it outside, or I call the sheriff right now. The tension snapped. Harry stepped back, seething, his smirk replaced with raw anger. My wife grabbed his arm, pulling him away, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. My daughter lingered, torn between them and me, her hand half extended as if reaching for something she no longer recognized. I shut the door slowly, the chain clicking back into place. The muffled buzz of voices carried down the hall, the gossip already spreading like wildfire. I turned toward the safe. My hand rested on the cold steel, feeling the weight of what lay inside. The car key wasn't just metal, it was the fulcrum of everything. They had tried to use it to control me, to humiliate me, to steal from me. And now it sat in silence, waiting for the moment I'd wield it as proof of their downfall. I sat back in the chair, letting the noise outside fade. My phone buzzed again, notifications piling up as the motel confrontation hit social media. The town was already talking. By morning, it would be more than whispers. It would be a firestorm. And this time, they weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at them. Still, one thought pressed against my chest like a stone, Harry's words before he left. "You'll regret this." No, I thought. He would. Because the storm had only just begun. The morning after the motel confrontation, the gossip had already spread. By the time I walked into the sheriff's office, heads were turning, whispers trailing behind me. They didn't need details, the town had its own way of filling in the blanks. But one truth had risen clear as daylight: I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The sheriff's office smelled of old leather and burnt coffee. Papers stacked high on desks, radios crackling softly in the background. Sheriff Daniels, a man I'd known for years, looked up from his desk as I stepped in. "Morning, William," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Heard there was a scene at the Sunset Motel last night." I sat down across from him, laying the folder I'd carried on the desk. "Not a scene. A revelation." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Go on." I opened the folder, sliding the documents across: the bank withdrawal records, the failed loan attempt, the forged co-signatures. Each page was a nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. Daniels whistled low. "You've got proof." I nodded. "Enough to show intent. Enough to show fraud. And enough to show they're living under my roof without right." His brow furrowed. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the car key. It glinted under the fluorescent light, not as a gift anymore, not as betrayal, but as evidence. I set it down gently beside the papers. "I want them out," I said flatly. "An eviction notice. Served officially. And I want a restraining order, Harry's name first on the list." Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You sure about this, William? Once I put this in motion, there's no turning back." I looked at the key, the steel catching the light. "There's no going back anyway." The paperwork wasn't quick, but it was thorough. I signed my name where it mattered, not on their false contracts, but on documents that carried the weight of law. Each stroke of the pen felt heavier than the last, but also liberating. By the time I was done, Daniels slid the papers into a thick envelope. "We'll serve them first thing tomorrow. You'll want to be home when it happens." Home. The word tasted strange on my tongue. It hadn't felt like home in months, maybe years. But tomorrow, it would again. That evening, I returned to the motel. I unlocked the small safe in the corner and lifted the car key from inside. For a moment, I just held it in my hand, feeling the cool weight against my palm. This wasn't just a key anymore, it was leverage. Proof that not everything they tried to steal could be taken. Proof that what was mine would stay mine. I slid it back into my pocket, stood tall, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the same one who had placed that key in her hand weeks ago. That man had been hopeful. Naive. Blind. The man in the mirror now was something else entirely. The next morning, I parked my old truck across the street from my own house. Sheriff Daniels and 2 deputies stepped up to the door, thick envelopes in hand. Neighbors lingered on lawns, pretending to rake leaves, pretending to fetch mail, but really just waiting for the show. My wife opened the door, her face pale when she saw the sheriff. Harry stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes darting nervously. "Ma'am," Daniels said formally, "we're here to serve an eviction notice. You and Mr. Harris," he deliberately used Harry's last name, not his first, "are to vacate this property within 7 days. Failure to do so will result in forcible removal." Gasps carried across the street. The neighbor across the way muttered, "About time." My wife's voice cracked. "This is our home." Daniels shook his head. "Not according to this." He handed her the envelope, heavy with papers. Harry snatched it, scanning the first page. His face drained of color. "This is a joke," he barked. "You can't do this." Daniel's eyes were cold steel. "The court says otherwise." From my truck, I rolled the window down just enough for my voice to carry. "You thought paperwork could steal from me. Now paperwork is what throws you out." Harry spun, his glare locking on me. My wife's lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. My daughter appeared in the doorway then, her face pale, eyes darting between us. I didn't look at her. Not yet. Because in that moment, this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about drawing a line so clear the whole town could see it. The deputies stepped back, their presence heavy, final. The neighbors whispered louder now, phones out, filming. This wasn't just eviction, it was exposure. I started the truck, the engine rumbling steady beneath me. As I pulled away, I reached into my pocket and touched the car key, its edges biting into my palm. Not as a gift. Not as betrayal. As justice. The house looked different when I returned 2 days later. The blinds sagged half open, the porch light flickered, and the air around it felt stale, abandoned. I parked my old truck at the curb and sat there a moment, watching. Finally, the door cracked open, and my daughter stepped out. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes red and swollen. She looked nothing like the confident girl who had once echoed her mother's words against me. Now, she looked like a child standing in the ruins of a life she didn't build but was forced to defend. "Dad," she whispered when she reached me, her voice broken. "Can we talk?" I nodded and followed her inside. The living room was a battlefield, unpaid bills strewn across the coffee table, envelopes stamped in red, past due. Final notice. Collections. On the counter sat her mother's purse, turned inside out, receipts spilling out like confessions. "They're calling every hour," my daughter said, her hands trembling as she clutched one of the envelopes. "Creditors, banks, even the power company. They say if we don't pay, they'll shut everything off." Her voice cracked. "Harry's gone, Dad. He left. He just disappeared." I didn't answer. I only walked slowly to the table, my eyes scanning the bills, loans, credit cards, overdrafts. Every line item another nail hammered by greed and deceit. Finally, she reached into her pocket. Her hand shook as she pulled out the car key, holding it out to me with trembling fingers. Her eyes begged silently, forgiveness, rescue, something. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, my voice low, final. She blinked, tears spilling over. "But, it's yours. It should never have left your hand." My jaw tightened. I reached out, but instead of taking it, I pushed her hand gently but firmly away. The key slipped from her grip, clattering onto the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the hollow room, sharper than glass breaking. The silence afterward was unbearable. I looked at her, my voice sharp as steel. "Keys don't unlock trust once it's broken." She dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick it up, her sobs spilling into the quiet. The key lay in her palm again, but now it looked heavier, as though she finally understood it had never been just metal. "I didn't know what I was signing," she whispered through tears. "I thought I was helping Mom. I thought," her voice faltered. "I was wrong." I let her words hang in the air, not offering comfort. She needed to sit in the weight of them, to feel the consequences of siding with betrayal. A knock rattled the front door then, sharp, official. Sheriff Daniel's voice carried through the wood. "Serving notice. Vacate within 5 days." My daughter flinched, clutching the key tighter. Her sobs grew harsher, echoing against the walls of the home that no longer belonged to her mother's lies. I turned toward the door, my back straight, my voice steady. "She heard you." The sheriff left the envelope on the step, his boots crunching against gravel as he walked away. Through the window, I saw neighbors lingering again, heads shaking, phones out. The whole town was watching this family's collapse, her collapse. And in that moment, I didn't feel shame. I felt vindication. I turned back to my daughter. She sat there on the floor, the car key clutched in her hands like a relic of everything she had lost. Her tears soaked it, her whispers crumbled around it. But I didn't reach for it. I didn't bend. Because the key no longer belonged to her, or to her mother. It belonged to the truth. And the truth was this: they had built their house of lies, and now it was burning down. Sunday morning came heavy with clouds, the kind that pressed low and gray against the rooftops. I hadn't planned on going to church that week, not after the motel, not after the eviction papers, not after hearing my daughter's sobs echo in the hollow house. But something pulled me there anyway. Maybe habit. Maybe something deeper. The church bell tolled as I stepped inside. The sanctuary buzzed with hushed voices, but when I entered, the whispers sharpened. Eyes followed me down the aisle. I didn't flinch. I'd grown used to the weight of their stares. I slid into a pew near the back, folding my hands in silence. The wood beneath me was worn smooth from decades of devotion, but today it felt like stone. When the pastor stepped up to the pulpit, his voice carried steady and calm. "The truth," he said, "defends itself." His eyes met mine briefly, as though the words were meant less for the congregation and more for me. I nodded once. A few rows ahead, my wife sat stiff-backed, her head tilted high as though the whispers around her didn't exist. But I could see it, the tightness in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched the hymnal too hard. My daughter sat beside her, pale, eyes red, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The sermon wound on, words of forgiveness and consequence weaving together. But forgiveness wasn't the air in that room, it was judgment. Murmurs rippled from pew to pew, soft but cutting. "That's her. She's the one. Tried to steal from him." Halfway through, I shifted in my seat. The car key I had carried in my pocket since leaving the motel pressed against my thigh. I reached for it absent-mindedly, and as I adjusted, it slipped from my grasp. The key fell, clattering loudly against the wooden pew, bouncing once before striking the floor. The sound silenced the entire sanctuary. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. For one frozen moment, every ear strained toward that echoing metallic note. I bent down slowly, my hand closing over the key. When I straightened, I didn't hide it. I let it rest in my palm, visible. Not flaunted, simply undeniable. The whispers grew louder, sharper now. "That's the car. The one she took." My wife's head snapped around, her face pale as she realized what had just happened. She stood abruptly, her hymnal sliding to the floor, and stormed toward the exit. The doors banged shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the hushed church. My daughter stayed seated, frozen, her eyes wide with shame. She didn't follow. Not this time. The pastor cleared his throat, voice firm. "Sometimes, God reveals the truth not with words, but with echoes." His gaze swept the congregation before landing on me again. "Let us remember, silence cannot erase what is already known." I slid the key back into my pocket, my hand curling around it tight. Not as a weapon now. As proof. When the service ended, I lingered. Parishioners passed me by, some offering nods, some whispering words I didn't need to hear. A neighbor's voice drifted close, "We always wondered, now we know." Another murmured, "She brought this on herself." I walked out into the heavy gray light, the church doors closing softly behind me. My daughter emerged minutes later, her face streaked with tears. She stopped a few feet away, her hands trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. I didn't force it. I simply nodded once and walked past her, the key pressing against my palm with every step. The truth no longer lived in secret corners. It had been dragged into the light, in front of neighbors, friends, the entire congregation. And now there was no putting it back. The week after the church service, the storm reached its peak. By then, gossip wasn't gossip anymore, it was fact. Neighbors no longer whispered behind cupped hands, they spoke openly, shaking their heads when my wife walked past, crossing streets to avoid her. Even the diner, once her stage for mockery, had turned cold. I knew the endgame was coming when my lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, called. His voice carried the kind of weight that only comes when truth is ready to burn through lies. "William," he said, "you need to come to my office. We found something." I drove there that afternoon, the car key heavy in my pocket, the weight of it pressing like an anchor. Whitaker spread papers across his desk as I sat down. Among them, one stood out immediately, a deed transfer. My name scrawled at the bottom, but not in my hand. "She tried to transfer the house," Whitaker said grimly. "Claimed you signed it over. But the notary stamp is a forgery. Sloppy work, but dangerous if it had slipped through." I traced the false signature with my finger, the ink looping in ways I'd never write. My chest tightened, but not with shock. With confirmation. "She didn't just betray my marriage," I said quietly, pulling the car key from my pocket and pressing it flat against the paper. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent light, cutting across the false signature. "She tried to erase my name from history." Whitaker leaned back, studying me. "We can bring this to court. With the bank statements, the loan attempt, and now this forgery? It won't just be eviction anymore. It'll be exposure. She won't be able to show her face in this county again." I nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I want." The hearing was set within days. Small-town courts move faster when fraud touches land and deeds. On the morning of, I walked through the courthouse doors with the folder tucked under my arm. My boots echoed against marble floors, the sound steady, final. Inside, the benches were already filled. Neighbors, churchgoers, even a few of Harry's so-called friends, all gathered, waiting. Public fallout wasn't coming. It was already here. My wife sat at the defendant's table, her face pale, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. Harry wasn't beside her, he'd vanished the moment the sheriff's notice hit, his courage evaporating as fast as the credit he'd leached. Whitaker laid the forged deed before the judge. "Your Honor, this is not only fraud but theft attempted under false pretenses. The signature is not my client's, nor was it witnessed legally. The intent was clear, to strip him of property he worked for his entire life." The judge studied the page, frowning deeply. Murmurs swept the room. My wife's voice broke the silence. I didn't know Harry did that." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Yet your name is all over this paperwork. Care to explain?" She stammered, but nothing coherent came. Her lies had run out of oxygen. Whitaker turned to me, nodding. I stood, pulling the car key from my pocket. I held it up, the metal catching the light for the whole room to see. "This key was the start," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "I gave it as a gift. She turned it into a weapon. And when that wasn't enough, she tried to turn it into a deed, into my name, my history, my life's work." I stepped forward, placing the key on top of the forged document. The clang echoed through the hushed courtroom. "This isn't about a car anymore. It's about dignity. About legacy. And I won't sign either away." The room stirred, whispers rising into a wave of approval. The judge slammed his gavel once. "Enough. The evidence speaks for itself. This deed is fraudulent. All related attempts at transfer are null and void. Furthermore, any attempt to access my court again with such documents will be met with criminal charges." My wife's shoulders sagged, her face ashen. I turned slowly, scanning the crowd. Neighbors nodded. The pastor met my eyes and gave a small, solemn bow. Even the banker, standing in the back, offered the faintest smile of vindication. For months, they had watched me be mocked, belittled, stripped. Now they were watching her stripped instead, of lies, of leverage, of respect. When the gavel struck again, I picked up the key and slid it back into my pocket, leaving the forged deed flat on the judge's bench. One symbol I kept. One lie I left to burn. The diner smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. I had chosen this place on purpose. Neutral ground. Public, but quiet enough that every word would carry. I slid into a booth near the window, the morning sun slanting across the cracked vinyl seats. My old truck was parked just outside, its faded blue paint catching the light. That truck had carried me through decades, storms, double shifts, moving furniture, taking my daughter to school when she was still small enough to fit in a booster seat. It wasn't much to look at, but it had never betrayed me. The bell above the door jingled. My daughter stepped in, her face pale, her eyes swollen from nights of crying. She spotted me, hesitated, then walked over slowly, as if every step carried the weight of her choices. "Dad," she whispered, sliding into the booth across from me. "Please, don't shut us out completely." I studied her face, the same face I'd once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, the same face that had lit up at Christmas morning. But now it was streaked with regret. She clutched the car key in her palm, but she didn't lay it on the table this time. She held it like a child might hold a broken toy, hoping I could fix it. "I lost everything," she said, her voice breaking. "Harry's gone. Mom, she's not herself. We have nothing. Please, Dad. We need you." The waitress poured us coffee without asking, her eyes flicking nervously between us. The other patrons pretended to read menus, but I could feel their ears stretching toward our booth. Public fallout had a way of multiplying in small towns. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a different key, the old truck key. Its edges were worn smooth from years of use, the metal dull, but solid. I set it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked down, confusion crossing her face. "That's not the car key." "No," I said softly. "It isn't." She frowned, tears spilling again. "Then why show me that?" I wrapped my fingers around the chipped coffee mug, staring at her steadily. "Because this key still opens something I can trust. Something I built with my own hands, something that's carried me without fail. Forgiveness is free, daughter. But trust? Trust has a price you can't afford right now." Her face crumpled, the word striking harder than any raised voice could have. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes behind the counter. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was helping her. I leaned forward, my tone low but sharp. "You thought wrong. You chose her words over mine. His words over mine. And now you've seen where those choices lead." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered over the truck key. "I can do better. I'll prove it. Just, don't give up on me." I didn't move the key. I didn't pull it back. I simply let it sit there, heavy in the sunlight, between us like a wall. The bell over the door jingled again. A few heads turned, it was my wife. She froze when she saw us, her face pale, her shoulders stiff. She didn't come closer. She only watched, her eyes flicking to the table, to the truck key resting between us. For the first time, she seemed to understand, the car key was no longer the center of this story. It was over. She turned and left without a word, the bell jingling once more as the door closed behind her. My daughter buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. I let the silence stretch, the clink of forks and the murmur of gossip surrounding us like a soundtrack. Finally, I stood, sliding the truck key back into my pocket. Finish your coffee, I said quietly. The world won't stop for your tears. Her sobs quieted, her body still shaking. She looked up, searching my face for something, anger, forgiveness, maybe hope. But all she found was resolve. I left a few bills on the table, nodded to the waitress, and walked out into the morning sun. My old truck waited, steady, reliable. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and gripped the worn steering wheel like an anchor. Behind me, through the diner window, I saw her still sitting there, staring at the empty space where the key had been. Not the car key. The truck key. And that made all the difference. The courthouse buzzed like a hive that morning. Neighbors lingered on the steps, whispers trailing through the crisp air. Inside, the benches were packed, pastor, banker, even the motel clerk. Faces I'd known for decades now watched with sharpened eyes, eager for the final act. I walked down the aisle slowly, the weight of the car key in my pocket grounding me. Every step echoed against marble floors, heavy, certain. For the first time in months, I felt no hesitation. At the front, my wife sat alone at the defendant's table. Harry was gone, vanished like smoke after a fire. She avoided my gaze, her face drawn, her hands wringing the edge of a worn handkerchief. My daughter sat a few rows back, her head bowed, shame heavy on her shoulders. Judge Emerson adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. We are here today to address charges of attempted fraud, forgery, and unlawful financial activity. My lawyer, Whitaker, stood first. He laid the forged deed on the bench, alongside the bank statements and the failed loan attempt. Each page landed with the weight of truth, each one another brick in the wall of evidence. This is not speculation, Whitaker said firmly. This is deliberate. My client's home, his property, his dignity, nearly stolen by those closest to him. The judge scanned the papers, his frown deepening with each line. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, pulling the car key from my pocket. The room quieted, every eye following the gleam of metal in my hand. This, I began, my voice steady, was meant to be a gift. A symbol of gratitude, of love. Instead, it became a weapon. It was paraded, demanded, twisted into leverage. And when that wasn't enough, they forged my name. Tried to erase me. I stepped forward, placing the key on top of the forged deed. The metallic clang echoed through the hushed room. This isn't about a car anymore. It's about respect. About legacy. About the dignity a man earns over a lifetime of work. And no amount of deceit will sign that away. The pastor in the back nodded solemnly. A murmur of agreement rose from the benches. Even the banker, stiff and formal, allowed a small nod of approval. My wife's voice cracked. I didn't mean. The judge silenced her with a raised hand. His gavel struck once. The court finds this deed fraudulent and void. Furthermore, all joint accounts are to be frozen pending full review. Mr. Harris, he didn't even use Harry's first name, is wanted for attempted fraud and will face charges when located. As for Mrs. Keller, he paused, his eyes heavy on her. You leave this courtroom without claim, without ownership, and without standing. Gasps swept the room. My wife slumped forward, her face pale, her shoulders shaking. I didn't look at her. Instead, I turned toward the benches, meeting the eyes of my neighbors, my pastor, my banker. For the first time in months, I saw no pity. Only respect. The judge slammed the gavel again. Court dismissed. The room erupted in whispers, people standing, gathering their things. But their eyes lingered on me. And this time, their stares didn't burn. They steadied me. I picked up the key from the bench, slipping it back into my pocket. My daughter watched me as I passed. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she didn't reach out. Not this time. She only bowed her head, as though she finally understood. Forgiveness might come, but trust had been locked away. Outside, the air felt lighter. The courthouse steps were crowded, the community spilling out in clusters. Whispers turned into nods, into words spoken loud enough for me to hear. He stood his ground. He didn't bend. He kept his name. I walked through them slowly, the key heavy in my pocket, not as a burden anymore but as a shield. At my truck, I paused, resting my hand on the door. The old paint was chipped, the metal scarred, but it had carried me through storms before, and it would again. I looked back once at the courthouse. My wife stood at the top of the steps, alone, her figure small against the crowd. No one went to her. No one comforted her. She was a shadow fading from a story she no longer controlled. I slid into the truck, turned the ignition with the worn key, and felt the engine rumble to life. In my pocket, the car key pressed against my leg. Not a gift. Not a weapon. Not even a burden. A reminder. Family isn't blood. It's respect. And dignity, that's the only inheritance I choose to keep.